Hello everyone, my name is Jack Parker. I'm the director of the 7th Annual Advancing Pre-Construction Conference. I'm here today with one of the presenters at the upcoming conference in June. This is Paul Kirchoff, Chief Revenue Officer at Epsilon Industries. Epsilon does a lot of innovative work in the off-site construction space, particularly integrated mechanical and electrical systems. How are you today, Paul?
Good, Jack. How you doing?
Good, perfect. So Paul, your session is all about the importance of providing an integrated service during pre-construction. So why do you believe, first of all, that relying on an integrated service is a better choice for a job compared to the traditional series of more niche specialist subcontractors?
Right. Well, good question, Jack, and good morning. Yeah, for us, really, it's all about considering how we as an industry kind of plug those gaps in the contract chain, right? Since those gaps, we've all seen are the things that lead to scope, cost, schedule issues, right? As you mentioned, our session in particular is going to be talking about approaching offsite construction as an integrated service. That is, as you said, like the shifting of key on-site activities to offsite as a way to achieve better cost certainty, schedule surety, that sort of thing. Addressing labor risk, the kind of things that are driving people in that direction. When offsite construction makes sense, what we're seeing is that a lot more project teams are increasingly choosing more of like an integrated approach, right? You pick a partner to handle the design and the construction of that offsite piece, rather than maybe letting traditional partners try to put together some kind of design and construction plan. Ultimately, we see that happening because I think project teams are realizing, if you want to pull a critical piece of the scope out of a job and have it done as offsite, you really need to make sure the right parties have got their eyes on that, right? And the people that are the experts in that are responsible for it. So for instance, on an offsite construction approach, you want to make sure whatever you're building offsite is laid out in a way that can be modular, right? Built modularly in a factory, pre-tested in an efficient way, prepped for shipping, shipped across the country perhaps, reassembled very quickly so it can get up and going. That requires a firm that's an expert in like integrating all of those things, which wouldn't normally happen in a traditional field approach. That's critical. It also requires, thinking about procurement and pre-construction in a different way, right? Since you're engaging new partners in new ways, generally much earlier than you might otherwise have done. So it definitely takes some planning and foresight.
Sure, that makes sense. So a large challenge that I think everybody in pre-construction has had the last 12, 18 months has been around the supply chain disruption. As an integrated supplier where you're relying on the same parts quite consistently, how have you been impacted by that supply chain disruption? And do you believe you have more certainty or less certainty over your materials and equipment compared to other contractors?
That's like the $64,000 question these days, right? I mean, how do we address this crazy volatility that we're all seeing in the supply chain, not just for pricing, but for lead times? This is much of an issue, right? It could really throw a project off kilter. I wouldn't sit here and tell you that Epsilon or offsite construction is the silver bullet to that, right? I mean, for the most part, companies like ours are still sourcing a lot of the same stuff from the same suppliers, the same supplier network as maybe traditional partners might be doing. But I will say one thing. There may be one inherent advantage to offsite construction as like an integrated service, in the sense that very often we're engaged much earlier in the process than maybe a traditional site partner, right? So we're able to maybe make some critical decisions on major, say, pieces of equipment that need to get ordered to supply that to supply the overall schedule. Make decisions earlier, get the project team to buy off on it earlier, place orders earlier. That in and of itself can shift the whole schedule for our piece to the left, right? And that's the key is making decisions earlier. So to the extent that offsite construction as an integrated service is elected earlier, that definitely, we're seeing that definitely helping the overall picture.
Sure. You mentioned about getting involved earlier. Let's say that there's a general contractor or even a client watching this, and they maybe are less familiar with design assist or less familiar with doing offsite construction. When and how should that GC reach out to partners like you to kind of kickstart this process? And Do you think design assist and prefab can be applied to any job, or is it just jobs of a certain size, certain complexity, or particular markets?
Yeah, good questions. From a timing standpoint, we said it before, but earlier is good, right? We recommend if a project team is thinking about offsite construction, get some potential partners engaged. Really once the schematic design phase is done, so you've got some basic project parameters established, right? That's important. But having said that, by the time, like say, 100% design development package is done, you really want to be using that information to go out and get integrated offsite construction partners on board. That's when you really want to get them on board, so that you catch that piece at the critical stage. You get an offsite constructor involved before the rest of the project team kind of gets into the weeds on a lot of the details. That helps, if nothing else, make sure that whatever's being done offsite is very well integrated with all the on-site activities, right? So you really want to get them involved earlier. But again, probably after the SD stage is done. In terms of what jobs would be good for design assist, it's really about size and complexity, Jack. The larger and more complex these jobs are, the more important it is to be carefully integrated with the rest of the project scope, with help from the right offsite constructor as an expert. Whereas if it's a simple scope, maybe a single module that's supposed to go into a project with limited field work, maybe limited sort of points of coordination with the field work, maybe design assist isn't necessary. What we would recommend is, if a project team's thinking about this, talk to some potential offsite construction partners, see what they think, right? Is it a good application for design assist or not? They'd probably be the best ones to potentially weigh in on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Perfect. So obviously doing design assist and offsite construction requires buy-in very early on from the project client and the general contractor. Are you finding that enthusiasm and that buy-in is harder or easier to get going into 2022? And when you do have a project partner that maybe isn't brought in, how do you go about getting them engaged?
Yeah, it's funny. It almost gets back to your question about supply chains, right? I mean, what is driving this sense of getting offsite construction teams integrated? For the past few years and frankly the past few months, we're seeing a lot more owners and construction managers looking for more creative ways to kind of manage that risk, right? And one of the ways to manage the risk is to get key folks on board early to start making some of those decisions, pulling the trigger on, say, major equipment that has particularly long lead times and volatile pricing out there. So definitely, we'd say overall, like coming into 2022, it's becoming easier just by virtue of that fact that there's this element of like, wow, we can actually nail down some of the points of risk by getting these folks on early. Definitely helps. In terms of the naysayers, I would say, every day we get more great case studies of how this actually works. So, inevitably, in a project team where you've got lots of different stakeholders, maybe one or two won't have had a lot of experience with it, or might not be comfortable with how it affects their role. But inevitably, we're seeing there's so many great examples of how it works that those folks are usually brought on board pretty easily, and the whole thing works out very well.
Yeah. No, I can see how that's all related. Perfect. Well, I won't dive in too much deeper because I know that this is exactly, you're going to be going to those details at the conference in just a few months. This year won't be the first time that you've participated at Advancing Preconstruction. What is it about this conference that encourages you to attend year after year?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We participate in several different Hanson Wade conferences. They're all really good in the sense that they are very focused on particular challenges or maybe stages of our industry, and this one's no exception. I mean, there's so much to talk about regarding pre-construction. It's that stage of a construction life cycle that really deserves a deep dive. But it's also a stage that can be very resistant to change. I mean, what we see is that so many project teams, especially in that pre-con stage, they're moving so fast. They're focused so much on cost and schedule, the pressures they're under. Sometimes it feels to those teams like, man, doing something differently is maybe a luxury they can't afford, which is ironic because, if we want to address these challenges we've got, you have to do things differently, right? So again, getting the right people together from the right companies and the right roles in a conference like this is, sharing shared challenges and the ways to get over them. That's the way to solve these problems. And that's what this conference does. And this is why we continue to attend. It's a great one.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for your time, Paul. For those of you watching but not yet registered to join us in June, you're very welcome to register for the 7th Annual Advancing Pre-Construction Conference taking place in Las Vegas, June 13th to 15th. Paul and I will be joined by hundreds of contractors sharing best practices across procurement, estimating, design coordination, contract types, and much more. Details are all at advancing-preconstruction.com. So Paul, I look forward to seeing you there and everybody else, but thanks for your time today.
Likewise.